and the increasing of the regulation from the government.
And from the imagination to harsh reality, we have to admit that the whole industry actually now is facing pretty fierce competition. And also services providers like Meituan and JD Logistics, backed by the China's e-commerce giant, are also under tightening scrutiny from the government. So what's your outlook for this industry as a whole?
Well, for this industry, it will be under pressure for quite a while in the future. Meanwhile, the expansion rate will still keep on expanding. I mean, the growing rate. The growing rate will be around 20 to 30% for years because China's digital industry is actually increasing. But the problem over here is that the government is putting a lot of pressure onto things like employee protection, benefit to employees, social insurance, monopoly, all these kinds of things cut the potential profit that might be gained by these companies. So what you might see in the next few years is that the market keep on increasing because the digital market is actually expanding. The growth speed will still be there, 20%, 30%, but the profitability will be low or even negative. So it really based on how the investors are going to look at that. The market sentiment will play a lot in here. If investors believe that the profitability will return and the market is still growing, you will see a very bull market. But on the other hand, if people say, okay, they are not going to make a lot of money in the future, even if they are very large companies, the valuation will drop.
And also, Jiahe, we noticed that Meituan is to release its first quarter earnings later today. So what's your outlook?
Well, the outlook will, my personal outlook would not be a very happy financial statement if you talk about the profit, because Meituan has not been reporting a lot of profit in the past. And if you look at what's going on in the first quarter of the year, they will not be able to report the profits. The regulation is increasing. They have to pay more money for the social insurance of their employees. The profitability is being cut because there are being pressure on the monopoly issue. So the profit will not be nice. But you can still see the income growth. Like I just said, this market is expanding. People are ordering more and more things on internet. The market will expand, that's for sure.
All right, Jiahe, thank you so much indeed for your analysis. Jiahe Chen, Chief Investment Officer at Novum Arcade Technologies. All right, Christine, that's the latest in business. Back to you.
That's a great discussion. Many thanks for that, Henry. Now, the rocket fire may have been stopped from a week ago. There's a new battle, though, raging now over the recent conflict in Gaza. The UN Human Rights Council has voted to launch a probe into possible crimes and systemic abuses committed. Israel has described this as shameful. The United States deeply regrets it, and Hamas, they welcome it. The vote barely carried, though, by 24 to 23. Pakistan had proposed this resolution on behalf of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Hamas has urged the council to go even further, calling for punishment. Now, Israel accuses the council of defaming a democracy trying to defend itself.
Another shameful day at the Human Rights Council of the United Nations. They shamelessly whitewash a brutal genocidal terrorist organization that not only tries to kill Israeli civilians, but abuses Gaza's civilian population, exploiting it as a human shield. That's a double war crime.
270 Palestinians died in this 11-day conflict, most of them in Gaza. Now, the rockets fired by Hamas, those killed 10 people in Israel. The UN Human Rights Chief has called out both sides, saying indiscriminate and disproportionate Israeli airstrikes may constitute war crimes, whilst Hamas, their indiscriminate rocket attacks, violated humanitarian law. This truce, brokered by Egypt, is into day 8 now. Israeli media say the Egyptians want a long-term ceasefire, and they've invited Israel, the Palestinian Authority, and Hamas for a summit. Israel's foreign minister will visit Cairo next week. The Israelis are apparently demanding separate talks whilst at the summit with each of Hamas and the Palestine Authority. Also, they are linking reconstruction in Gaza to the return of Israeli captives. Now on to the forced landing of an airliner in Belarus and the arrest of a dissident on board. That has had much of Europe up in arms. The International Civil Aviation Organization, or ICAO, has agreed to probe that forced diversion of the Ryanair jet to Minsk. The 36-nation Governing Council of ICAO took action after the United States and several allies demanded an investigation into this incident. Belarus had scrambled a fighter jet and used a false bomb alert to divert this airliner to Minsk so that it could detain the dissident journalist on board. ICAO investigators are expected to produce an interim report in about a month's time. But the agency has reminded they can only rule on safety and security standards. They do not have the capacity nor the capability to take punitive action against any member country. This move comes as more details are surfacing about what happened on the ground. A Swiss email provider has now revealed this bomb threat cited by Belarus was actually sent after the plane was diverted. In the meantime, foreign ministers from the G7 nations, together with EU, have released a joint statement to condemn that action taken by Belarus. They're also calling for the release of the journalist now detained in Minsk. Proposals are also on the table targeting key sectors of the Belarusian economy with sanctions. They include the potash, the oil and finance industries.
Not individual companies, not individual people, but talk about the sectors that actually benefit the regime most. We could talk about the oil product sector. That could be one option, but it hasn't been discussed yet. So I'm just presenting my opinion.
Minsk rejects those charges that they may have acted illegally. They accuse the West instead of using this episode to wage a hybrid war against the country. Russia's prime minister is now in Minsk to discuss the diverted flight, and he has reiterated Russia's support for Belarus.
Российская Федерация однозначно выступает против односторонних санкций и диктата на международной арене. Мы призываем не политизировать ситуацию с экстренной посадкой самолета в Минске и поддерживаем позицию белорусских партнеров о необходимости и, конечно, готовности провести транспарентное международное расследование по линии авиационных властей.
The U.S. transport services are bracing for record numbers of people traveling through this weekend for the Memorial Day holiday. It marks the start of the summer travel season, and we'll take a look at the rising sea temperature triggering storms in India.
Bearing the brunt of worsening global warming.
As we see the whole landscape changing, it is really impacting our way of life.
Can we reduce our carbon footprint to fight climate change?
We're doing our bit to not rely so much on the coal-fired power stations to power what we do in our house.
Are the steps we're taking really enough? CNA correspondent fighting climate change. Tonight on CNA.
ちゃんは山梨名物のほうとう食べたいもの触れていません。嬉しさってオンとオフあります。俺全部いつもオフかな。
へえ、こうやってなるんだ。いい話。はいはい。
Japan Hour Saturday on CNA. Japan Hour is brought to you by Sumitomo Corporation and SMBC.